Japan, a land shaped by storms, spirit, and honor. From mist-covered mountains to sacred shrines, its past is a tapestry woven with beauty, conflict, and quiet transformation. In our last episode, we uncovered the foundation of this ancient civilization. From the first hunter-gatherers who left behind pottery and legends, to the early farmers who brought metal, rice, and structure. We explored the rise of powerful clans, the first imperial court, the arrival of foreign faiths, and the early attempts to mold a centralized state. But that was only the beginning. Today we enter a new chapter, an age of refined elegance and quiet power, where art and poetry masked political decline. As the court grew distant, new forces began to stir, warriors bound by loyalty, ambition, and the sword. Ahead lie years of civil strife, battles for supremacy, and the rise of warlords who would fight to shape Japan's future. And eventually, from the ashes, a new order will emerge. In 794 CE, Emperor Kanmu moved the imperial capital for the final time, this time to a place of intentional symmetry and spiritual alignment. Heian Period, the capital of peace and tranquility. The move marked the end of the Nara period and the beginning of something new. Kanmu sought a capital free from the political entanglements of Buddhist clergy, choosing a site nestled in a natural basin surrounded by rivers and mountains. Heian Period was modeled after the Tang dynasty's capital of Chang'an, designed to embody cosmic balance. From its grid-like layout to its central palace complex, it was a city that reflected not just power, but purpose. Kanmu's early reign also saw reforms aimed at reasserting imperial authority, military campaigns in the northeast, land redistribution efforts, and curbing aristocratic power. But after his death, that vision began to slowly slip from the court's grasp. With Emperor Kanmu's successors focused increasingly on ceremonial roles, true control of the state shifted into the hands of the Fujiwara clan. This powerful aristocratic family mastered court politics, not through violence, but through strategic marriage. Their daughters became imperial consorts, and their grandsons were named emperors. In this way, they ruled as seisho, regents for child emperors, or kampaku, chief advisors to adult emperors. Their rule was epitomized by Fujiwara no Michinaga, perhaps the most powerful non-imperial figure in Japanese history. Under Michinaga, the Fujiwara reached their peak. He was father to empresses, grandfather to emperors, and held near total control of appointments, finances, and state policy. During his dominance, the court was wealthy and peaceful, but also deeply disconnected from the provinces. The Fujiwara's rule emphasized ritual, poetry, and rank over governance. They allowed shuin, tax-free private estates, to proliferate, which gradually weakened the state's ability to tax and enforce law, especially in the countryside. This detachment would prove costly to the Fujiwara in the future. Even as political power shifted, culture blossomed. The Heian period is remembered as one of the most refined and artistically prolific in Japanese history. Elegance, aesthetic sensitivity, and emotional restraint were the ideals of court life. Literature flourished, especially at the hands of women. Murasaki Shikibu, a lady-in-waiting in the Fujiwara court, authored The Tale of Genji, often regarded as the world's first novel. Her fictional prince, Genji, lived in a world of quiet suffering, forbidden love, and fleeting beauty. Meanwhile, Sei Shonagon, her contemporary, penned The Pillow Book, a witty observational diary capturing the day-to-day minutiae, gossip, and rituals of palace life. Visual arts, music, and architecture also reached new heights. The Yamato-e painting style emerged, focusing on native themes and refined aesthetics. Calligraphy became an art of seduction and diplomacy. While the Fujiwara polished courtly elegance, the provinces became increasingly lawless and self-reliant. Unable to enforce imperial rule across the growing patchwork of shuin, provincial landowners and monastic estates began hiring their own enforcers. These were the samurai, men trained in martial arts, mounted combat, and absolute loyalty to their lord. What began as private militias evolved into a new class. These warriors took pride in their strength, discipline, and honor, but above all, in their independence from the distant court. They developed early forms of a martial code and banded into clans that passed land, loyalty, and leadership through bloodlines. The most powerful of these were the Minamoto and Taira clans, both descended from imperial princes, but now rising as de facto rulers in the provinces. As their numbers and power grew, it became clear the emperor's authority was weakening. By the end of the 11th century, the Fujiwara dominance began to fade, not with a coup, but through a quiet revolution called Insei, or cloistered rule. Cloistered rule was a system introduced by Emperor Shirakawa, who abdicated the throne in 1086, but continued to govern from behind the scenes. Though he was living in monastic seclusion, he retained power as a retired emperor, using his spiritual status and loyal allies to override both Fujiwara regents and sitting emperors. Under Shirakawa and his successors, like Emperor Toba, cloistered emperors regained much of the political initiative lost during the Fujiwara era. They created their own courts, influenced succession, and used religious authority to solidify control. But this resurgence came at a cost. Now, three sources of power jostled for dominance in the capital. The current reigning younger emperor is in one faction. The retired older cloistered emperor is in a second faction. Finally, the remaining aristocratic families and regents as the third. Meanwhile, in the provinces, samurai clans had become stronger than ever and were increasingly inserting their influence in court politics. The imperial court, once the sole seat of authority, was becoming crowded and unstable. With tensions rising both in the capital and in the provinces, the stage was now set for open conflict. By the mid-12th century, the fragile balance of the Heian court began to unravel. In 1156, a succession dispute after the death of cloistered Emperor Toba led to the Hogan Rebellion, a short, brutal conflict that shattered centuries of courtly tradition. The struggle pitted two imperial claimants and their supporting clans against each other. On one side stood Taira no Kiyomori, a bold and ambitious warrior from a powerful maritime family in western Japan. On the other side, Minamoto no Yoshitomo, heir to the storied Minamoto line in the east. Both were sons of samurai aristocracy and were now fighting for control of the empire. The rebellion ended swiftly with the defeat of the Minamoto's faction, but in a strange twist, Kiyomori spared Yoshitomo. It was a decision he would come to regret. 3 years later, in 1159, Kiyomori and Yoshitomo clashed again, this time in the Heiji Rebellion. Yoshitomo launched a surprise attack and briefly seized the imperial court at a capital. Kiyomori, who was away on a pilgrimage at that time, returned to the capital and swiftly crushed the uprising. Yoshitomo was captured and executed, along with many of his sons. Only a few survived, including a young boy named Minamoto no Yoritomo, who was sent into exile. Taira no Kiyomori emerged as the undisputed master of the court. He broke precedent by having his grandson enthroned as emperor and toku. Now, for the first time, a samurai family held direct imperial power. But Kiyomori's rise would ignite the fires of vengeance and set the stage for civil war. The first spark of the Genpei War came not from the battlefield, but from a scroll. In May 1180, Prince Mochihito, a younger son of Emperor Go Shirakawa and a rival to the throne, issued a secret call to the Minamoto clan, urging them to rise up and remove the Taira who had grown corrupt, tyrannical, and dangerously powerful. The Taira, under Taira no Kiyomori, had dominated court politics for decades. Once a regional warlord, Kiyomori had risen to unprecedented heights for a samurai, placing his daughter, into the imperial family and installing his own grandson, the infant Emperor Antoku, on the throne. He moved the capital from Heian-kyo to Fukuhara, a symbol of his contempt for aristocratic tradition. Prince Mochihito's message was more than a rebellion. It was a summons to restore legitimacy, a spiritual and political cry against what many saw as Kiyomori's desecration of the imperial line. The scroll reached Minamoto no Yorimasa, a veteran courtier and loyal Minamoto patriarch. Though old, Yorimasa recognized the moment, and he responded. He rallied warrior monks from the Mii-dera and Byodo-in temples and prepared to march. But the Taira had ears everywhere. Meanwhile, in the eastern provinces, a 33-year-old exile named Minamoto no Yoritomo received the same message. Yoritomo was no ordinary man. The third son of Minamoto no Yoshitomo, he had survived the Heiji Rebellion of 1159, when his father had been killed by Kiyomori and most of his brothers executed. Yoritomo, spared due to his youth, had spent over 20 years in political exile under the watch of the Hojo clan in Izu province. Though quiet in appearance, he was a man of deep memory, long patience, and immense ambition. He had waited half his life for this moment. When the summons came, Yoritomo raised the white Minamoto banner. From that quiet eastern coastline, history began to shift. His first goal was not conquest, but consolidation. He began sending letters across the provinces, mobilizing minor samurai clans, promising land, titles, and redemption for those who joined his cause. Among the first to answer were the Miura, Chiba, and Hojo families, forming the core of what would become the Eastern Minamoto Alliance. Kiyomori, furious at the uprising, ordered the arrest of Prince Mochihito and launched a nationwide manhunt for the rebellious prince. Mochihito fled to the temple at Byodo-in, and it was there, under siege, that the first real clash of the war erupted. The first battle of the Genpei War took place just weeks after Prince Mochihito's call to arms, and it was fought not by armies, but by a desperate alliance of monks and loyal retainers. Prince Mochihito, having declared the Taira-backed throne illegitimate, fled the capital with his protector, the elderly but revered Minamoto no Yorimasa. Together they sought refuge at Byodo-in, a grand Buddhist temple near Uji on the southern outskirts of Kyoto. There, they were joined by warrior monks from the Mii-dera and other nearby temples, armed ascetics who wielded naginata with the same fervor they recited sutras. Together they formed a ragged, outnumbered force, bound not by numbers, but by conviction. But the Taira were already on the move. Leading the vanguard was Taira no Tomomori, son of Kiyomori, young, disciplined, and determined to crush the rebellion before it could spread. With him marched hundreds of mounted warriors, bearing crimson banners and curved blades. The Minamoto and their monk allies prepared their defense at the Uji Bridge, the narrow span that crossed the river into the temple grounds. Knowing they couldn't hold open ground, they made a bold choice. They tore up the bridge's planks, leaving only the support beams. What followed was not a battle, it was a sacrament of resistance. The Taira cavalry reached the riverbank just before dawn. Arrows darkened the sky. The first waves attempted to cross by foot, but many fell into the river. Then, in a moment that would be immortalized in woodblock prints for centuries to come, the Taira samurai charged across the beams, balancing on narrow timbers under a hail of arrows. The warrior monks fought with the fury of faith, defending every inch of ground. Some used long spears to knock Taira warriors into the water. Others loosed flaming arrows into the undergrowth, but the Taira's numbers and training were too great. The Minamoto lines faltered. One by one, the monks fell. Prince Mochihito was wounded and attempted to flee, but was captured shortly after and executed on Kiyomori's orders. Minamoto no Yorimasa, seeing the end, retreated into the Phoenix Hall of Byodo-in, where he composed a final poem and then committed seppuku, the first recorded ritual suicide in samurai history. Yoramasa's act set a precedent that would echo through centuries of samurai culture. Honor in death became as sacred as honor in victory. The Battle of Uji was a tactical loss, but a spiritual beginning. It showed the Minamoto were willing to die for their cause. It showed that even temples could become battlegrounds. And it proved that the war was no longer political, it was existential. The capital had been secured, but the provinces were awakening. In the east, Yoritomo's rebellion was only just beginning. Yoritomo's first step was political. He reached out to the region's semi-autonomous clans, families like the Hojo, Miura, Chiba, Taira of Kazusa, and Ashikaga, promising not just vengeance or honor, but something far more tangible: land, titles, and autonomy under a Minamoto-led government. His greatest ally would be the Hojo clan, particularly Hojo Tokamasa, and more crucially, Hojo Masako, Yoritomo's wife and one of the most formidable political minds in Japanese history. As these alliances solidified, Yoritomo established his military base in the fishing village of Kamakura, a natural fortress flanked by mountains on 3 sides and the ocean on the 4th. He built roads, fortifications, and administration centers. He appointed Jito, land stewards, and Shugo, military governors, to oversee lands on behalf of the clan. These were the early skeletons of feudal government, a parallel structure to the imperial court that existed outside Kyoto's jurisdiction. But establishing this power was not bloodless. In September 1180, Yoritomo attempted his first real military strike, a march against the Taira-aligned forces of Oba Kagechika near Ishibashiyama in modern-day Kanagawa. Yoritomo's army was small, just 300 men, but he believed that local support would swell his numbers. The plan failed. Rain turned the mountain into a quagmire, and reinforcements were delayed by flood. In the dead of night, the Taira launched a surprise attack. Yoritomo's men were overwhelmed. Many were killed or captured. He barely escaped with his life, fleeing through mountain trails and taking shelter in a tree hollow near Hakone. Had he been found, the Minamoto line may have ended there. But defeat at Ishibashiyama only hardened Yoritomo's resolve. In retreat, he became stronger. In the months that followed, Yoritomo regrouped and began building his army anew, this time not through conquest, but through diplomacy and administration. His offer was clear: serve the Minamoto and rule your own land. By the winter of 1180, Yoritomo had formed a stable base of operations in Kamakura, with a growing network of eastern clans aligned to his cause. The Taira, preoccupied with unrest in Kyoto and the west, underestimated the threat. While Yoritomo rose in the east, the Taira faced their own unraveling. In March 1181, Taira no Kiyomori, now aged and consumed by fever, died after a brief and painful illness. In his final days, he raged at the heavens, cursing the Minamoto and ordering the death of their kin. But even as his body was carried to cremation, his clan's grip on the capital was slipping. Kiyomori had elevated the Taira to unprecedented power, but in doing so, he invited national resentment, sowed discontent among nobles, and ignored the provinces. His death left a leadership vacuum, with Taira no Munamori, his less capable son, assuming command. The dragon was dead, but the war had only just begun. As Minamoto no Yoritomo built his power base in Kamakura, his cousin, Minamoto no Yoshinaka, was advancing from the north. Yoshinaka, also known as Kiso Yoshinaka, was raised in exile in the Kiso Valley of Shinano Province after the downfall of the Minamoto clan in the Heiji Rebellion. Isolated from court politics, but steeped in the culture of the frontier, he emerged a hardened warrior and a gifted strategist. When Yoritomo answered Prince Mochihido's call to arms in 1180, Yoshinaka raised his own banner in Shinano. But his path was not one of alliance, it was one of independence. While Yoritomo focused on consolidation, Yoshinaka pushed west, burning through the provinces like a storm, seizing forts, crushing Taira-aligned landowners, and building a following of rough but loyal soldiers from rural warrior clans. By mid-1183, as the Taira struggled to maintain control in Kyoto and news of Kiyomori's death spread, Yoshinaka launched a bold campaign directly toward the capital. En route to Kyoto, Yoshinaka was intercepted by Taira forces at Shinohara in Echizen province. The battle was fierce. Yoshinaka's army, though outnumbered, used hit-and-run tactics and terrain to their advantage. The Taira were defeated, and the path to Kyoto was open. In August 1183, Yoshinaka approached Kyoto. The Taira, recognizing their weakened position and fearful of an uprising, chose to flee the capital rather than defend it. They took with them the young Emperor Antoku, the imperial regalia, and the remnants of their court, heading west toward Fukuhara, then further to the strongholds in the inland sea. Yoshinaka expected accolades. Instead, he found distrust. Courtiers and priests viewed him as a provincial upstart. His men, ragged and undisciplined, looted supplies and clashed with local residents. He tried to establish himself as shogun, but his rule was erratic and brutal. To secure political authority, he made a fateful move. He demanded retired Emperor Go-Shirakawa name him official commander of the imperial army. When the emperor refused, Yoshinaka stormed the palace, burned the imperial library, and took Go-Shirakawa hostage. This act of sacrilege turned the capital against him, and turned Yoritomo against him as well. In January of 1184, he dispatched 2 men to rectify the problem. His half-brothers, Minamoto no Noriori, and the youngest and least proven, Minamoto no Yoshitsune. Minamoto no Yoshitsune was only in his early 20s, but his presence would change the course of the war. Born shortly before the fall of the Minamoto in 1159, he had been hidden and raised in the monastery of Kurama in the northern hills of Kyoto. There, he studied swordsmanship, literature, and strategy, emerging not only as a warrior, but as a cultivated tactician of rare genius. Now, in the winter of 1184, he was riding against his own kin. Knowing he had lost the court's favor, Yoshinaka fled the capital with around 1,000 men and retreated eastward to regroup in Iwazu, in Omi province. But he would not escape. Yoshitsune and Noriori moved quickly, cutting off supply routes and driving his forces into the open. Despite harsh winter conditions, they pressed on relentlessly. By the time the two forces met, Yoshinaka's men were exhausted and outnumbered. Many had deserted. At Iwazu, he made his final stand. Yoshinaka was no coward. He donned his finest armor, fastened his sword, and prepared to die in battle, as a true warrior should. In the melee that followed, Yoshinaka was struck by an arrow to the face as he attempted to retreat into a bamboo grove. His horse was stuck in the snow. He fell. Surrounded and wounded, he is said to have cried, "This is the end." Kyoto was now under the control of Yoshitsune and Noriori, who were hailed as heroes for cleansing the capital of Yoshinaka's rogue rule. Emperor Go-Shirakawa, freed from house arrest, rewarded Yoshitsune with court titles and acclaim. The court was captivated by this elegant young general, who could quote poetry as easily as lead a cavalry charge. But in Kamakura, Yoritomo watched warily. His brothers were growing too popular, too admired. Yoritomo had unified the East, but now he feared losing the West. For now, the Taira remained at large. And despite all this internal strife, the war was not yet over. In the wake of Yoshinaka's fall, the capital was back under Minamoto control, but the Taira were far from defeated. They had retreated west to Ichinotani, a heavily fortified stronghold nestled between the mountains and the sea, near modern-day Kobe. The position was thought to be impregnable. Steep cliffs guarded the rear, and the inland sea offered escape and supply by ship. The Taira, still controlling Emperor Antoku and the imperial regalia, believed they could wait out the storm. But Minamoto no Yoshitsune had no intention of waiting. Yoshitsune knew he could not storm Ichinotani head-on. The Taira expected a conventional assault, so he devised something bold, a two-pronged attack, striking from both the expected and the impossible. On March 20th, 1184, Yoshitsune crested the ridge above Ichinotani. Below, the Taira were occupied with Noriyori's forces. With a war cry, Yoshitsune ordered the charge down the cliff. The cliff charge at Ichinotani became one of the most celebrated maneuvers in Japanese military history. Caught between two forces, Yoshitsune crashing in from behind, and Noriyori pushing from the front, the Taira lines broke. Taira warriors were cut down as they fled toward the sea. Some tried to escape by boat, others drowned trying to swim. One of the few survivors was Taira no Atsumori, a young noble only 16 years old. As he fled on horseback to the shoreline, he was caught by the Minamoto warrior Kumagai Naozane. Kumagai prepared to strike, but as he looked into Atsumori's face, he saw not an enemy, but a boy as young as his own son. Moved to tears, he hesitated, then delivered the fatal blow, weeping. He later became a monk, haunted by the moment. The story of Atsumori's death became a central legend of the Genpei War, a symbol of the tragedy of civil war, where honor and cruelty walk side by side. After their devastating loss at Ichinotani, the Taira clan fled further west, retreating to their stronghold at Yashima, a fortified island base in the inland sea near modern-day Takamatsu. There, they re-established a floating court aboard moored ships. The Taira court in exile still held the trappings of legitimacy, noble rank, the child emperor, the regalia, and a fleet of ships. But they were weakened, isolated, and stretched thin across the sea. They believed Yoshitsune would need weeks to prepare a naval expedition, and that the inland sea, long a Taira stronghold, would offer ample warning of any attack. Once again, they underestimated him. In March 1185, Minamoto no Yoshitsune led a daring, lightning-fast naval raid on Yashima with a small fleet of boats. Instead of waiting for the full Minamoto navy to gather, he chose speed over strength, hoping to strike while the Taira were unprepared. As the ships approached Yashima under the cover of night, Yoshitsune ordered fires lit along the coast to give the illusion of a large army approaching by land. The Taira, deceived, panicked. Fearing a pincer attack from both land and sea, they abandoned their moorings and fled out into open water. Yoshitsune had won a victory without drawing his sword. It was one of the most brilliant deceptions of the war. Yashima had fallen without a full naval battle. The Taira fled once more, toward the narrow straits of Dan no Ura, where their fleet would make a final, desperate stand. April 25th, 1185, the calm before history's storm. In the narrow waters of the Shimonoseki Strait, the final fleets of the Minamoto and the Taira faced each other. The battle began in the early morning. The Taira held the advantage. They knew these waters well, and the tides initially favored them. Their fleet, still strong, outmaneuvered the Minamoto, using the current to harass and flank. Taira no Tomomori, a seasoned general and a man of grim resolve, stood at the bow in full armor, directing the battle with precision. For a time, it seemed the Taira might turn back the storm. But then, the tide changed, literally. As the current reversed direction mid-morning, the advantage shifted to the Minamoto. The Taira ships, caught broadside by the flow, were suddenly exposed, and then came betrayal. A Taira general, Taguchi Shigeyoshi, defected mid-battle, revealing to Yoshitsune which ship carried Emperor Antoku and the imperial regalia. With that knowledge, the Minamoto launched a concentrated assault on the emperor's flagship. The Taira began to break. Panic spread. Arrows rained down. Ships collided. Soldiers were thrown into the sea, either by enemy blades or in desperate retreat. The battle devolved into chaos. Yoshitsune, agile and fearless, leapt between ships in full armor, leading his warriors in person. The Minamoto pressed hard, cutting down ship after ship. Realizing defeat was inevitable, Taira no Tokiko, the widow of Kiyomori and grandmother of Emperor Antoku, took the 6-year-old boy in her arms. In a final act of loyalty and sorrow, she clutched the sacred sword Kusanagi, one of the 3 imperial regalia, and jumped into the sea. Antoku drowned. The regalia sank with him. The imperial line survived, but its soul had been cast into the depths. All across the fleet, Taira nobles and warriors followed suit. Taira no Tomomori, wounded and bloodied, tied an anchor to his waist and leapt into the waves. In one morning, the Taira were annihilated. With the Taira clan utterly destroyed at Dan no Ura, the civil war that had torn Japan apart for 5 years finally ended. But victory came with questions. Who would rule now? And how would Japan govern a country changed by blood? The answer was not in Kyoto, but in the east, where Minamoto no Yoritomo had been building more than just armies. He had been building a government. In the wake of the Genpei War, Minamoto no Yoritomo stood not only as a victor, but as the architect of a new political system. Rather than rule from Kyoto, the seat of imperial and aristocratic culture, he chose the seaside town of Kamakura as the capital of his bakufu, or tent government. From this coastal fortress, surrounded by natural defenses, Yoritomo reimagined governance in Japan, a system led by samurai, backed by military might, and structured around personal loyalty and land-based rewards. He implemented a new hierarchy. Gokenin, or direct vassals, were sworn to the shogun, providing military service and receiving land or administrative rights in return. Jito, estate stewards, collected taxes and managed lands on behalf of the regime. Shugo, military governors, oversaw provinces and enforced law. While Yoritomo built the future, Yoshitsune's fame soared in the present. Celebrated as a hero, the emperor showered him with titles. The people loved him. The court admired him. But Yoritomo grew wary. To the shogun in the making, Yoshitsune's growing popularity posed a threat. In 1285, he declared his own brother a traitor and forbade him from entering Kamakura. Yoshitsune fled, becoming a fugitive, chased across the country he had helped reunify. Years later, he was betrayed and forced to take his own life in the north. His head was sent to Yoritomo, preserved in sake. In 1292, Minamoto no Yoritomo was officially appointed Sei Taishogun, a title once used to describe generals sent to pacify distant tribes. But this time, it marked the beginning of something unprecedented. The Kamakura shogunate was born, the first true bakufu, or tent government, run by warriors, not aristocrats. Yoritomo had turned the Minamoto clan from rebels into rulers. This structure operated in parallel to the Kyoto court, creating a dual system: aristocratic ritual in the west, military control in the east. But make no mistake, real power now belonged to the samurai. Yoritomo also established legal codes specific to warriors, creating a precedent for samurai ethics and justice that would persist for centuries. He reinforced inheritance rights, emphasized loyalty over blood, and handled disputes with direct, often brutal clarity. With this foundation, Yoritomo unified the provinces under a single military rule, firm, centralized, and backed by generations of warriors who saw him not just as a leader, but as the embodiment of a new age. But the system he created would struggle to survive him. In 1199, Minamoto no Yoritomo died under mysterious circumstances, falling from his horse near the Sagami River. Whether accident, omen, or conspiracy, his death left a void the shogunate was unprepared to fill. His heir, Minamoto no Yorii, was just 18 and ill-suited to rule. Unlike his father, Yori lacked both discipline and vision. Worse still, he mistrusted the Hojo clan, his mother's family, and former allies of Yoritomo. Sensing weakness, Hojo Tokimasa, Yoritomo's father-in-law, acted quickly. He maneuvered to strip Yori of effective power, first limiting his access to government, then placing him under house arrest. By 1203, Yori was formally deposed and later assassinated. Tokimasa installed Yori's younger brother, Sanetomo, as shogun, but this was in name only. Real power passed to the Hojo, who established the title of shiken, or regent, effectively making them the true rulers behind a rotating line of puppet shoguns. Leading this transformation was Hojo Masako, Yoritomo's widow and one of Japan's most formidable women. Known as the Nun Shogun, she donned Buddhist robes but remained a political force, maintaining control during multiple assassinations and uprisings. Through her and Tokimasa, the Hojo clan ushered in a regency that lasted over a century, keeping the shogunate functioning while the figurehead shoguns came and went, often descendants of either the Minamoto or imperial bloodlines, selected for obedience, not strength. The Kamakura Bakufu had evolved. No longer a simple warrior court, but a bureaucratic regime ruled through proxy, managed by a single family, and constantly negotiating power between shogunate and court. In the late 13th century, Japan faced a threat unlike anything in its history. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan and emperor of the Yuan dynasty, had conquered China and Korea, and now turned his gaze to Japan. He sent envoys demanding tribute. The Hojo regents refused. In 1274, the first Mongol invasion began. The invading force included over 20,000 troops, drawn from across the Mongol Empire, Chinese infantry, Mongol cavalry, and Korean sailors. They landed at Hakata Bay in northern Kyushu. The defenders, samurai who had never encountered such warfare, were stunned. The Mongols used gunpowder bombs, tight infantry formations, and coordinated group tactics, unlike the ritualized one-on-one combat favored by Japanese warriors. But after a single day of battle, a powerful typhoon struck, scattering the fleet and sinking hundreds of ships. The Japanese, believing they had been saved by divine intervention, called the storm Kamikaze, the divine wind. Kublai Khan was undeterred. In 1281, he launched a second invasion, this time with two massive armadas, totaling over 140,000 troops, making it one of the largest attempted amphibious assaults in world history. But Japan had spent the intervening years fortifying its shores, building stone walls, preparing garrisons, and organizing samurai response units. The Japanese resisted fiercely for weeks, refusing to allow landfall. Then, once more, a typhoon struck, more violent than before. Over half the fleet was destroyed. Tens of thousands drowned. Survivors were hunted down. The second invasion had failed, utterly. The victory became legend. Japan had been spared. Victory against the Mongols brought no spoils, no conquered land, no treasure, just debts. The Hojo Bakufu had drained the country building defenses, funding fortresses, and maintaining a standing army for over a decade. But the reward system that sustained samurai loyalty, land grants in exchange for service, had nothing left to offer. Many warriors returned home with empty hands and full debts. Discontent festered. Younger samurai, denied inheritance, became ronin, wandering masterless swordsmen. Regional lords, called gakunin, began to question the legitimacy of the Hojo regents. Meanwhile, the imperial court, impoverished and powerless in Kyoto, began to plot its return to authority. The economy, stressed by inflation, land disputes, and peasant unrest, teetered. The warrior government had proven its strength in war, but it was now vulnerable in peace. In 1331, Emperor Go-Daigo, tired of centuries of symbolic power, attempted to seize real authority from the Hojo. He raised an army to restore imperial rule, but was captured and exiled to the Oki Islands. From there, he plotted a second, bolder revolt. This time, powerful warriors rallied to his cause. One was Nita Yoshisada, a veteran general who, in 1333, marched on Kamakura with a formidable army. Another was Ashikaga Takauji, a Hojo ally who would eventually betray them and seize power for himself. Kamakura's defenses held at first, but morale crumbled and internal divisions deepened. Facing inevitable defeat, the entire Hojo family committed mass suicide at Toshoji Temple, a final act of feudal loyalty. The Kamakura shogunate, the first military government in Japanese history, collapsed. The fall of Kamakura left a power vacuum and a nation in chaos, which would lead us to the Muromachi period, where the Ashikaga clan rises, emperors divide the country, and the seeds of the Sengoku Jidai are sown. A new era dawns, not of peace, but of shadows and ambition. Thanks so much for watching, and for joining me on this journey through one of the most fascinating chapters in Japan's history. Today, we explored the elegance and complexity of the imperial court, the rise of the warrior class, the clash of rival clans in a bitter civil war, and the birth of a new kind of rule under the shogunate. But we're still far from the end. In the next episode, we'll enter a time of shifting loyalties, fractured power, and near constant conflict. An era where samurai battled not just for land, but for the soul of Japan itself. So if you're enjoying the series, please like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, or suggestions for what you'd like to see next. There's so much more to uncover, so stay with me as we unravel the history of Japan.